What comes to mind first when you hear the word pride, or when you imagine a proud or prideful person? Pride is a confusing double-edged sword. On the one hand, we're told to have some pride and to be proud of our achievements. We see really important and powerful movements like Black Pride and Gay Pride, which encourage equality and the elevation of marginalised communities. Good. But on the other hand, we're also warned off pride from a young age when told that pride comes before a fall, or that it's at the bottom of all great mistakes. If we read the Bible, we'll learn that the Lord detests the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. So what's the actual deal with pride? Can we choose the good version instead of the bad? My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the Betwixt app. And I'm delving into the fascinating wisdom to be taken from myth, fairy tales and other forms of story, especially when viewed through the lens of Jungian psychology. In this series, we're breaking down, reframing, understanding and occasionally debunking the 7 deadly sins. First up, the big daddy that is pride. One of the most enduring myths associated with the sin of pride is the tragic story of Narcissus, a beautiful youth in Greek mythology who falls in love with his own reflection. This story, as told by Ovid in his Metamorphoses, goes something like this. Narcissus, son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Liriope, was renowned for his extraordinary beauty. Many fell in love with him, but he rejected them all. Among his spurned admirers was the equally beautiful and equally tragic character of Echo, a mountain nymph cursed by the goddess Juno who'd angrily taken away her power to begin a conversation. As a result, Echo could only ever repeat the last words someone else said to her. Having fallen deeply in love with Narcissus, Echo followed him around, reciting his own words back to him in a desperate attempt to connect. Narcissus, however, thought she must be ridiculing him and therefore shunned her. One day, as Narcissus wandered through the woods, he came upon a clear pool of water. Leaning over to drink, he saw his reflection for the first time and was entranced by it. Unaware that the image was merely his own, he fell deeply in love with what he saw. Speaking to his reflection in the water, Narcissus said, "Your gaze is fond and promising. I stretch my arms to you and you reach back in turn. I smile and you smile too." But when he tried to embrace his reflection, fingers disturbing the surface of the water, the image of course dispersed. Narcissus eventually perished, dying by the water's edge. In some versions of the myth, the gods took pity on him and transformed his body into a flower, the narcissus, of course, which still grows by the water, bending down as if to gaze at its own reflection. Echo, in her despair, also eventually fades away, becoming nothing more than a haunting voice to be heard in caves and other barren, empty places. In short, it didn't end brilliantly for either of these characters. So what is this myth trying to tell us? In order to unravel the meaning of this story, we need to remember that the Jungian interpretation of archetypal stories such as this one is that individual characters and other elements in the world represent different aspects of the psyche, as opposed to separate entities. What this means is that Echo can be seen as a part of Narcissus's personality, just as Narcissus can be seen as an aspect of Echo. So while on the surface this myth can come over as a warning, a story about fate's direct punishment of a young man's unpalatable vanity, there's more to Narcissus than just conceit. To take an arguably better, healthier perspective on this tale, we need to consider how Narcissus grew so obsessed with his own image in the first place. Such an obsession is, of course, not uncommon. Culturally, we elevate physical beauty far beyond what could be considered healthy or realistic. And this was apparently just as true of the ancient Greeks as it is of our society today. As an exceptionally beautiful example of a man, a character like Narcissus would have been continuously praised and adored on account of his looks. The problem with this is that the things we get praised for in life so very often become entwined with our fundamental sense of self. Like a little child who's been thrown into beauty pageants since age 4, we can imagine that Narcissus grew up believing that his worth and appearance were one in the same, a still common misconception that disconnects us from both our true selves and other people. A modern-day Narcissus would probably not stare at a pool of water so much as into the black box of his mobile phone, afraid to actually venture out into the real world in case his real self doesn't live up to the perfection of his heavily filtered Instagram reflection. To make matters worse, when someone like Narcissus encounters their Echo-like admirers, that experience can be painful. That love, as superficial as the physical beauty itself, reinforces the belief that we are valued only for such external qualities. In other words, that the rest of us, the real, deeper self, is invisible, that it simply doesn't matter, that we don't matter, unless we're pleasing to the eye. So what if, when Narcissus sees his reflection in the water, he is not just captivated by his own beauty, but rather mesmerised by the only image of himself that he feels allowed to love? What if this fixation on his reflection represents a desperate but misguided attempt to connect with himself and find something inside that is worthy of acceptance? Deep down, he knows he wants more from himself than just that surface-level image. We see this when he tries and fails to reach through his reflection and find something of substance. We also see this in his rejection of Echo, as someone who can only ever reflect Narcissus back to him with her echoing words. Narcissus wants more, needs more, from himself and from others, but he just can't get a hold of it. Viewed through a Jungian lens, then, Narcissus represents the part of the personality that believes one's worth is based on external, objective things or achievements. We all have this part to varying extents, although we don't always focus it on physical beauty. For some of us, our most desirable reflection will be made of achievements, accolade, power, wealth, or possessions. And is it not tempting to believe in the reality of these effigies? Is there not a weird kind of comfort in believing that if we can just tweak that image until it's as perfect as it can be, that we will then feel a tangible sense of worth? All of a sudden, the vanity of Narcissus feels altogether different. And what about Echo? When viewed through this lens, her part in the story also transforms. Instead of being a mere victim of unrequited love, or worse, a vacuous, infatuated pest of a woman, Echo can be seen to represent the most vital part of Narcissus that he is unable to reach. That is, the anima or soul, his true self, repressed emotions, genuine need for connection and love beyond the superficial. Echo's curse, which is also Narcissus's curse, reminds us of how unacknowledged, unexpressed emotions and needs forever fail to be satisfied. Instead, they echo back to us perpetually, unheard and misunderstood. Ultimately, Narcissus's inability to acknowledge the love and connection offered by Echo leads him to slowly waste away, a metaphor for the spiritual and emotional death that can result from buying into the fantasy that true worth can be achieved by perfecting the version of self we show the world. This more empathetic take is a much kinder way to read the myth of Narcissus, but it still sounds a bit like a warning more than anything else. So is there even a good side to pride? Yes, there is. Just as Narcissus's disconnected end in this story can be seen as a warning of the dangers of exaggerated pride, Echo's fate can be seen as a cautionary illustration of what awaits if we go the other way, if we relinquish self-interest so entirely that we direct all of our love exclusively outwards and onto others. Healthy pride, then, must exist somewhere between these two extremes, a balanced version of this energy that allows us to love both ourselves and others. In psychology, this healthy pride is known as authentic pride. It's the positive counter to hubristic pride, which is, of course, what we see with Narcissus. Let's break the two terms down really briefly. Hubristic pride, which is experienced when we have an overinflated sense of self-importance, is actually adaptive. It enables us to obtain dominance and power, which in the hierarchical social system that is the human race can sometimes be necessary, helping us to win important resources that mean that we're able to feed and clothe ourselves, etc. However, hubristic pride is an ineffective means for achieving good relationships or general happiness. Authentic pride, on the other hand, is more realistic and allows for the appreciation of other people around us. In order to feel authentic pride, we don't need to feel better than other people. On the contrary, this is an eyes-open type of pride that feeds on connection and enjoyment of others in our lives. It's important for healthy drive and self-esteem, motivating us to persevere even in the absence of external incentives. It therefore supports the pursuit of positive and value-aligned goals. In other words, we need this kind of pride in order to live a life of meaning, purpose, and connection. How do we choose the latter? The key difference between these two types of pride comes by way of integration, self-awareness, and healthy contextualization. We get the dark side of pride, hubris, when we close our eyes to it, brand it as bad, and force it into the shadowy waters of the unconscious. When we do this, we can find ourselves enslaved to a devouring sense of unacknowledged pride, which shuts us off from the world and inspires toxic competitive behaviour. If we work to bring pride out of the shadow and into the light of conscious awareness, however, if we work to accept and integrate it, then this aspect of self can bloom into something of great worth, authentic pride. In a practical sense, doing this means taking the time to observe and reflect on our thoughts, emotions and behaviours, and resisting the urge to quickly sweep any signs of hubris under the carpet. Counterintuitively, it requires that we acknowledge and own the things we feel proud of, rather than batting compliments away or downplaying our successes. But that's not enough on its own. We also need to acknowledge the help we've had along the way. This point is really key. A big part of this alchemical process must involve diligent and often challenging contextualization of ourselves in relation to the rest of the world. If we fail to acknowledge our privilege, be that of class, gender, race, position within our family or extended social circles, or any other kind of advantage, then we run the risk of inflating our own self-image to the point where it becomes a problem. To remain connected and awake is to stay grounded in our pride. Honouring the input of others doesn't diminish our success. On the contrary, it expands it, because then we get to feel proud not just of ourselves, but of those around us too. And finally, we need to align our personal pride with authentic meaning. If we take pride in the parts of our lives that correspond with our values and what gives us purpose, rather than trying to find it in things that we're conditioned to value, like beauty, wealth and power, then pride can drive us forward in a way that leads to more connection and a more meaningful existence. If Narcissus had been able, nay, allowed or at least encouraged, to see beyond the superficial beauty that the world told him was the source of his worth, then he would surely have found other parts of his life to feel proud of. If he had been able to access self-love and in turn receive the love of others, then he may have been able to tear himself away from the projected image of perfection to which he was so wedded. And the same goes for us. If we want to integrate the volatile potential of pride so that it serves us rather than hinders, then we need to choose to look beyond our superficial personas. We need to stop depending on our looks, achievements, qualifications, or our carefully curated Instagram profiles for a sense of meaning or worth. Because no matter how great those things might look, they can never ever offer anything more tangible than a rippling reflection. I wonder what this might mean for you. As always, I really hope you find this inspiring and helpful. If so, please like and share this video so others can find it. Also, if you're the kind of person who loves both stories and personal growth, then be sure to check out our app Betwixt, the mental health game. It's available on the iOS App Store and Google Play.